One of the more interesting post-war American poets is Elizabeth Bishop, and one of her more anthologized poems is the one entitled One Art. It originally appeared in, I think, the New Yorker in the mid-70s, and it is a curious little artifact. The form is very precise. It's technically known as a villanelle, or an adaptation of that form. It is composed of very tight tercets with a very precise rhyme scheme, ABA, 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 right up until the very last line where it breaks. It's remarkable for the way that it breathes casually. You can read this in a very normal voice, even as the form is so rigid. So it's this odd juxtaposition of form and content and structure and identity and humanity and voice within that creates a terrific amount of tension within this poem, and it just makes it really curious from a number of different perspectives. One art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of them will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent, I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied, it's evident. The art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Now, obviously a lot going on here. Clearly it's about loss. Clearly there's a sense of some ambivalence about loss, or at least a desire to seem ambivalent. There's a sense of great tension between wanting to appear casual while there are these torments churning just beneath the surface, just beneath her polite face, and the casualness of her voice. The art of losing isn't hard to master. It is trying to achieve a certain casualness about it, a certain So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Notice how the intent, the middle line in this tercet, essentially functions as an enjambment, where you just read through that line and you're back on the next thing. It's not that forced. It is a very precise form that she's working with here. It is a very exacting rhyme scheme that she is working with here, and yet she makes it seem so effortless. It's so, the Italians would call this sprezzatura. It's so casual, but it's casual with a very rigid structure. So that automatically brings to mind the idea of, well, the superficial casualness of it. Somebody who is trying to appear one way while something else is going on in underneath. Notice also the way she hits those lines. You know, the art of losing isn't hard to master is the first line of the first tercet. It is the last line of the second tercet, and it does come back, what is it, after the fourth, at the end of the fourth, and of course takes a twist in the last. So there's a little bit of a play with that line. It evolves as the poem develops. In content, it starts to become somewhat absurd It starts something, very casual. Lose something every day. The lost door keys, the hour barely spent. Just casual, like, oh, okay, let it go, let it go. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, names and places, and where it was you meant to travel. Interesting notion on travel there. The idea of getting outside oneself, of seeing something else. Perhaps this is an adventure. Perhaps this is something she planned to do with someone else. A regret, if you will. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, something of great sentiment, perhaps. And look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. Houses, okay, maybe this isn't physically losing something, but it is perhaps, you're losing it in the sense that maybe you lost the money for it. I don't know. Elizabeth Bishop's life was notably somewhat tumultuous, not uncommon for poets, and so there's certainly a lot of upheaval that she's going through. The sense of loss that is not just losing something like a set of car keys or door keys, but losing big chunks of your life, people. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. Goes back to the notion of travel, perhaps, the idea that maybe they did travel, Elizabeth, or the poetic voice, and the addressee in this, they perhaps in losing one another, they lost all of those memories because they're too painful. I'm not sure, 2 rivers, a continent. It's not like you can't find them again, not like you can't even return to them again, unless there is some emotional reason that you can't. But it's building in this kind of regular rhythm, regular meter and rhyme that's getting somewhat desperate and even a little bit forced, the way she plays with it occasionally, except the fluster in the second tercet doesn't quite rhyme with master and disaster, but then she gets it back. Maybe that is, just, well, I had no other word that would work there. Or maybe that's just a hint at the forced quality of this that comes early on. And then in the middle, the way she plays with, I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last and or, of course, making a kind of rhyme again, but just a little bit off, and it's suddenly seeming like, well, you're really gonna have to reach for that one. Again, it reads very smoothly. The voice sounds very calm and casual and relaxed, but there is this intricacy to the word choice, to the syntax, to this kind of forced outward appearance, and vaster, and then that powerhouse last stanza, no longer a tercet. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master. Notice that little tweak, not too hard to master. Again, a little evolution there, though it may look like write it like disaster. And here she's talking to herself. The poet is saying, I can't do it. She can't quite say that losing you isn't a disaster. Losing the addressee, losing that person from her life isn't a disaster, but she's trying, she's struggling, she's forcing herself to write it and say it's not a disaster, even though it might look like. Is she forcing herself to say that it's not, or is she forcing her to suggest that, well, it kind of was? I don't know. There's so much going on here that's really complicated and rich, and it's almost impossible to unpack. Yes, you can get drawn into her biography. Yes, you can find out that she had a number of failed love affairs, who hasn't, quite frankly? But she did have a very tumultuous life emotionally. She had a fairly unhappy life for big chunks of it. And without getting into that, you can see that this is somebody who is clearly complex, and the that forced appearance, that forced making everything seem casual and everything's fine, everything's okay. While there is this great undercurrent of anxiety, of pain, of misery, quite frankly. The art of losing is not too hard to master. It's like, okay, she has somehow gotten through it. She is maybe declaring a little victory, but the victory seems hollow because, again, it's straining. And in this, because in that last stanza, it goes to 4 lines and breaks out of the tercet form, you get a sense that maybe we are getting too close to the bone, and it is breaking her. It is forcing her out of the regular form of poetry. The appearance is now somewhat agitated. The appearance is broken. You could make an argument that, well, you got to wrap it up, and tercets go on, and how do you end something strong and make it seem like, okay, you got to end it with a twist, so that's a twist. Maybe there is a lot going on there that keeps the poem fresh. All of those little tweaks on the master rhyme suggest that, okay, she's trying to be clever and trying to have a little fun with it and give a little poke here and there and bring you along. Or maybe the pain is becoming too much to take. Maybe the suffering is having an effect, and maybe that is finally showing through in the poem itself. This is a very self-conscious poem. She's saying, write it. She's not even pretending that this is, her speaking or her thoughts or anything like that. This is a constructed poem, and maybe at the end she can't quite write it the same way because the art of losing is painful to her. It is not so much just the art, it is the losing that is predominant right here. It is the suffering of that experience. It is the discomfort in the world. It is the pain of trying to put on a brave face but not being able to. It's a fun little poem, short lines, very simple, very easy to get through. One of the reasons it's so widely anthologized, perfect for the New Yorker, for God's sakes. But it hints underneath this somewhat playful little surface. It hints at great, great depths of anxiety and human suffering. Coming out of the post-war period where everybody was supposed to be fine, the stereotypical 50s housewife type thing, you get a lot of that sense of, how do I don't, for God's sakes, I just don't want to look different. I just don't want to look like I'm suffering. It's all about that brave face. And this poem, in its simplicity and hidden complexity, in its casual insouciance and its beating anxiety, it offers a terrific image of that particular form of suffering.